The sudden military mutiny in Belarus, allegedly inspired by fractures within Russia's power circles, has plunged the region into deep uncertainty and placed President Alexander Lukashenko at the center of an unprecedented crisis that could either reinforce his authoritarian grip or mark the beginning of his political downfall. The crisis traces its roots to the Wagner Group rebellion in June 2023, when Yevgeny Prigozhin, once a close ally of Vladimir Putin, led his mercenary forces on a march for justice toward Moscow to protest against the Russian Defense Ministry's leadership, accusing it of corruption, poor logistics, and disregard for soldiers' lives. As the mutiny gained momentum, Russian military units appeared paralyzed and ill-prepared to resist, and the world watched in disbelief as an armed private army captured Rostov-on-Don and advanced hundreds of kilometers toward the capital. Then, unexpectedly, Alexander Lukashenko, the long-standing ruler of neighboring Belarus and often dismissed as Europe's last dictator, stepped in as a mediator, brokering a deal between Putin and Prigozhin that stopped the bloodshed. Lukashenko claimed to have personally convinced Prigozhin to halt the advance, warning him that he would be crushed like a bug if he continued, and persuaded Putin to offer limited guarantees of safety in exchange for de-escalation. For Lukashenko, the mediation brought him sudden global attention. For the first time in years, Western and Russian media alike portrayed him not merely as a puppet, but as a broker who had helped avert a potential Russian civil war. Yet, beneath the diplomatic triumph lay immense risk. By hosting some Wagner fighters on Belarusian soil and hinting that they might train Belarusian troops, Lukashenko appeared to strengthen his security apparatus. But he also imported a volatile element that could one day challenge his own rule. The presence of these seasoned mercenaries raised fears in Minsk that Belarus could itself become a playground for mutinous factions, especially given the country's deep economic dependence on Moscow and the simmering anger among ordinary Belarusians since the fraudulent 2020 elections. Lukashenko's survival has always depended on a delicate balance. Absolute internal repression paired with unwavering loyalty to Putin. But the mutiny exposed cracks in this formula. If Putin's control over his military elite can be challenged by a private army, then Lukashenko, whose domestic legitimacy is even weaker, must be aware that loyalty can evaporate overnight. The irony is that the same event that allowed him to act as a peacemaker also reminded everyone of the fragility of his regime. In the short term, the mediation strengthened him. Putin thanked him publicly, Russian media praised his brotherly intervention, and Belarus's elite rallied behind their leader, grateful to be portrayed as indispensable to the Kremlin. However, in the long term, this episode could turn toxic. Putin, known for neither forgiving nor forgetting, may interpret Lukashenko's moment of limelight as a subtle overreach, a reminder that Belarus's leader enjoys a degree of maneuvering room Moscow might prefer to curtail. At the same time, the Belarusian public, fatigued by years of economic stagnation, sanctions, and political repression, sees through the optics. To many, Lukashenko's role in the Wagner affair is not that of a hero, but of a man dancing on a volcano, trying to please both his patron in Moscow and his restless citizens at home. If the Wagner presence leads to further militarization or economic burden, domestic resentment could spike again, reviving the spirit of the 2020 protests that once shook his regime. Moreover, the potential death of Prigozhin in August 2023 under mysterious circumstances reignited questions about Lukashenko's true influence. Was he ever more than a messenger for the Kremlin? Or did he genuinely act on his own? For analysts, the answer is clear. Lukashenko remains deeply dependent on Putin's goodwill. Belarus relies on Russia for cheap oil, gas, loans, and military protection, and its entire economic system is intertwined with Russian trade routes and subsidies. Any serious attempt by Minsk to distance itself from Moscow would invite economic collapse or even political destabilization. Yet Lukashenko also knows that being too obedient makes him expendable to survive. He must appear useful. That's why he continues to craft an image of himself as the pragmatic statesman who can handle crises Russia prefers to avoid. His willingness to host Wagner troops, his balancing act between war rhetoric and peace talk, and his occasional outreach to China or the global south all serve to signal one message: I am indispensable. Still, His domestic problems remain formidable. The Belarusian opposition, though largely exiled or imprisoned, continues to command sympathy at home and abroad. The economy, strained by sanctions and isolation, struggles with inflation, unemployment, and brain drain. The younger generation sees no future in Lukashenko's stagnant system, while the older elite fears what might happen if Putin's focus shifts or if the war in Ukraine spills deeper into Belarusian territory. Lukashenko's claim that hosting Wagner fighters could strengthen Belarusian defenses rings hollow to many citizens who suspect the opposite, that it invites further dependence on Russia's unpredictable military machine. Meanwhile, NATO and neighboring Poland have tightened security on their borders, warning that any deployment of Wagner or Belarusian forces could provoke retaliation. In such a tense regional context, Lukashenko finds himself trapped between two fires: Moscow's dominance and the West's hostility. His attempt to appear as a neutral mediator masks the truth that Belarus has become a military outpost of Russia's strategic ambitions. Even as he boasts about sovereignty, Russian nuclear warheads are now stationed on Belarusian soil, an unprecedented step that effectively ties the country's fate to Putin's nuclear calculus. For ordinary Belarusians, this means living under the shadow of someone else's war. The mutiny episode may have saved Lukashenko temporarily, but it has also tied him even tighter to the Kremlin's destiny. If Putin weakens further, Belarus will face turbulence. If Putin grows more authoritarian, Lukashenko's own independence will shrink. Either way, the illusion of control is slipping. The paradox of Lukashenko's survival is that he must constantly demonstrate strength in an environment where real autonomy no longer exists. Every crisis he survives makes him seem tougher, but also more isolated. The Wagner mutiny offered him a rare diplomatic victory, yet it also reminded everyone that power in this region is fleeting, dependent on the whims of stronger men and the shifting loyalties of armed factions. Whether this marks the end for Lukashenko or just another chapter in his long reign depends on how he manages the next wave of challenges: economic fatigue, internal dissent, and the unpredictable moods of the Kremlin. For now, he remains standing, bruised but unbroken, ruling through fear and survival instinct. But the cracks are visible. The world has seen that even in the post-Soviet space, where autocrats once seemed untouchable, mutinies can emerge overnight, loyalty can vanish in hours, and history can change in a single phone call. Lukashenko's fate, much like Belarus itself, now hangs in a precarious balance between subservience and rebellion, between borrowed power and impending collapse. The mutiny may not have ended his rule, but it has exposed its foundations, revealing that beneath the confident posture of Europe's last dictator lies a man cornered by history, trapped in the very system he built, waiting for the next tremor that might finally bring it all down.